Into Fox Weather Live. We're just over 1 week removed from Hurricane Francine making landfall in Louisiana as a Category 2 hurricane, bringing dangerous storm surge and flooding to coastal communities before moving inland. It knocked out power to hundreds of thousands of people, and numerous water rescues were actually needed after people became trapped in their homes and their cars. We're already learning about the potential cost of this storm, and now a report by KC and Company actually finds that the privately insured losses from Francine will be around $1.5 billion. NOAA will actually complete its own analysis, but as of now, Francine is not officially a billion-dollar disaster. Either way, we know there's going to be a hefty price tag along with it. Let's bring in this market meteorologist, Fox Business contributor, Scott Martin. Not only does he know money, he knows weather. He's a weather enthusiast. He's got the gear to prove it.
Socks. The socks change with the weather outside too, Steve. So that's kind of
we're gonna have to activate tropical mode on those and just let it flood your shoes.
I might be stepping in some puddles here.
Right. Real quickly though, because again, you're the money guy, but you were talking to us when you were coming in. Weather was a dream of yours since you were like 4.
As soon as I could basically walk and talk, man, I just was, the weather was always inside me, as you probably feel that, and many of us out there. It just was something that I just identified with, that I thought about all the time, that I just wanted to be a part of. So this is like a dream to me, man.
Yeah, now we merged two passions, right? Business and weather. And as captivating as weather can be, right? You want to be a part of it. It can be powerful, deadly, and costly. So, Scott, I want to ask you about what we were just talking about. $1.5 billion that's coming in as an estimate with Francine. I was actually a little bit surprised by this number because I honestly thought it was going to be a tad lower when you walk it back. Yeah, we had a Cat 2 wind gust, but that was in Eugene Island off of the Maine coast. New Orleans got 9 inches of rain. Beyond that, you're not looking at a massive community getting wiped out like we've seen with other big storms. So when we look at all of this and we're showing you some of the visuals from this,
it didn't quite look like it.
It didn't quite look like a $1.5 billion disaster.
A couple things going on nowadays. I mean, obviously, insurance is a big part of this. And so people, I don't want to say they're overstating, but they certainly don't understate these days some of the damages because they need the relief. Secondly, Steve, these days with the proliferation of economic growth and population growth, there tends to be bigger impacts from these storms maybe than there were just a few years ago. Lastly, too, this one was a pretty widespread storm, even though you mentioned some of the direct impacts were a little bit less. It seems to me like I would agree. It seemed like it was going to be a little less than expected. But overall, though, given the impacts to the oil market, for example, not too terrible.
Yeah, the oil markets were actually surprising when we look at that, because coming into this event, we watched Francine real quickly form in the Western Gulf, right? So then we started looking at the ripple effects for oil and natural gas production. When you look at the price of the crude oil with what it was doing leading up to this during Hurricane Francine, it was actually going down. But interesting considering that the day after landfall, so we were talking about September 12th, it started to come back up. And we look at the percentages. Look at this. Offline, that's how many of these oil rigs kind of got shut down.
Almost half.
So the needle didn't move much.
Right.
So is there a long-term impact? Because it looked like the immediate impact wasn't much.
So the neat thing about what's going on in the Gulf these days, Steve, is a lot of these refiners are prepared for stuff like this. Like, meaning like these Cat 2s, these Cat 1s tend to maybe not have as much of an impact as they did before. We'd have longer shutoffs, bigger shutoffs. Secondly, oil prices have been a little fickle this year, and oil prices, production has been up across the world, and demand has been down. So it's funny we have this kind of glut in oil prices, or glut in oil as far as supply and production. So a hurricane that comes through and kind of rattles, say, the production levels doesn't seem to have as much of an impact because we've got kind of a positive slope when it comes to oil prices this year. And so far, it's been great. But I'll tell you what, we get a big storm out there, and we'll see. And also, you're not looking at long-term damage either to some of the refiners, too, because that was the other thing. The halts in production, not bad. Shutdowns or refiners that have to be repaired because they've been damaged would be a different scene when it comes to the price impacts.
Interesting to watch how that all unfolded. And like you had said, it's all about supply and demand. We got a surplus of supply right now. I want to shift our focus, though, because really the big thing that what came out this week was that coastal storm in the Carolinas. And so looking at this damage, I mean, Carolina Beach got under a state of emergency. They got battered by this, but it was not named. And for us in the weather community, obviously there's a significance, but I want to ask you for the insurance aspect of all of this. Does that change something because it wasn't named versus a named storm by the NHC?
Federal versus private, it does. Named storms tend to, you look at more FEMA type stuff for named storms versus private insurance, which is kind of for the last name and the named storm. So the named storms obviously apply more to, say, more of a national type of approach versus a more local. Now, when the named storms, though, come along, as we've seen, and they put pressure on FEMA, we talked about this earlier, Steve, in the season, when it looked like FEMA was going to maybe risk running out of money, and we thought we were going to have all these named storms, and that was going to be a big risk to the FEMA budget. My goodness, how is it nice to talk about right now today about the FEMA budget and how good it's looking because we haven't had so many named storms.
That leads us to our next thing. So leading up, look at this graphic that we have for you. What we were talking about, you and I, going into the hurricane season. And by the way, we were predicting an off-the-charts hurricane season.
In the 20s.
Yeah, and so we're looking at this. FEMA could run out of disaster funds going into a historic season. Why that was the case was because we had $20 billion disasters leading up to this. So now we look at a lackluster hurricane season so far. The prediction hasn't come to fruition, thankfully for us. In FEMA's latest report for August 2024, they actually still have funds about $7.9 billion. Looking at this now, what does this mean for us as we head into the spring severe season? Because when we look at the spring severe season, it's already off to a hectic start this week. I'm concerned. Do you think $7 billion is enough as we're looking at this secondary severe season?
It doesn't sound like it's ever enough, Steve, especially if we're spending it. But hey, let's throw it into a party fund or something like that. If we don't spend it all, hopefully, I'll tell you, that's my suggestion. But Steve, I'll tell you, it just takes one, though, doesn't it? It takes one or two storms to totally put that budget at risk. So as much as I'm happy that we haven't had those 20-some named storms yet, my goodness, man, we get a 4 or 5 out there, that budget could be wiped out in a snap, as you like to do.
I'm always
oh my gosh,
you noticed that today. We're talking about the potential, of course, the overcross or the overlap of the tropics with a big storm, potentially with the severe season. Fox Business contributor Scott Martin, friend of the show. Great to have you in New York, of course. And maybe I need to visit Chicago.
Come home with me, man. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's see you.
Kiana?